So hello, everyone, and welcome back. I know we had a bit of a hiatus. Most of you know I've been convalescing at home with COVID, and but I wanted to be able to have our class tonight, so it gave me constructive to do. Otherwise, I would have turned into a Netflix couch potato, which is very dangerous. So, the topic for today, and I'll put on the slides in a moment, is the Jew in European medieval art, Christian art. And we'll look at some of the ways Jews are portrayed, and specifically the portrayals of Jews that lead towards the anti-Semitic themes that we've seen developing and that do develop over time. There were two books specifically that I relied on for today that I worked myself through, because I don't have a substantive background in art history. And I will confess that I have a new appreciation for art history now, having spent some time preparing for today's talk, in terms of the familiarity that the art historian needs in art, the art tropes, in reading a piece of art the way you would read a complex text, understanding the intercontextual relations to other pieces of art, the historical background, the literary history, the political history, the theological background, and to make all those connections and tie things together is an extraordinary field, and it's a whole discipline. So we're doing just a small window into that today. The two books that I was working through, and they were on the list at the beginning. So this one book is called Dark Mirror by Sara Lipton, The Medieval Origins of Anti-Jewish Iconography. She's written other things too. This is her most recent book. She teaches medieval history at SUNY Stony Brook. And the other work that I worked through, we'll take some of the illustrations from today, is a book by Nina Rowe, who is also professor of art history at Fordham, and it's called The Jew, the Cathedral, and the Medieval City, Synagoga and Ecclesia in the 13th Century. And the Synagoga and Ecclesia, as you can see the picture here, is the motif that we see at a lot of Gothic cathedrals throughout Europe, the personification of the church as princely and regal, and the synagogue as a deposed queen, as a broken queen. And we'll look at some of those pictures up close. And it's really in the 13th century that the Gothic sculpture of the Ecclesia and the Synagoga motif really spreads and takes root. And the 13th century is a very important, it's the exact period that we were looking at last class. I know that was a few weeks ago since we met last, that where we also found the explosion of violence against Jews in Europe over ritual murder, accusations of Jews, desecration of the host, the burning of the Talmud in Paris, and eventually blaming the Jews for the Black Plague. And we also talked last time about the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, when there were restrictions there that were sent to all of the European kingdoms for controlling usury practice, that Jews could lend at interest but not undue interest. And also in that the Fourth Lateran Council was the doctrine of transubstantiation, the belief that the wine and bread of the Eucharist is transformed into the blood and the body of Christ. And that was what we spent the end of last class talking about, the historian Gavin Wagner's theory, that it's that kind of pushes anti-Judaism to start to transition to anti-Semitism, because people can't believe that, so they focus on the Jews and they blame the Jews as the symbol of the non-believers in society, in a Christian society, and they take their fury against the Jews rather than deal with their own doubt over the doctrines that they're being asked to believe. That was his theory. That's sort of a summary of what we did last class. let me put on the slides for today, and here we go. Okay, so the Jew in medieval Christian art. So there's two quotations here. The first one is the famous one from Oscar Wilde, from an essay he wrote in the late 19th century. Life imitates art far more than art imitates life. So that we're familiar with. Yep. We also see here, and Sara Lipton is the author of that volume I said on Dark Mirror, Medieval Origins of Anti-Jewish Iconography, and she's one of the top authorities on the image of the Jew in Christian art. I'm sorry, so, and I know you say, but what years we're talking? I'm just looking at the question. I was talking about the 13th century, which is the 1200s.
What was the name of those letters or typer of those?
Letters?
Yeah. Did you say there were certain letters were written in the 1300s?
No, I'm not sure. No. So what Sara Lipton said is art can affect as well as reflect the culture that creates and views it. So she's really rephrasing what Oscar Wilde says and is talking about that in relation to the understanding of Jews in Christian art in the Middle Ages, because there's not a lot of Jewish art. There are some illustrated manuscripts that we could look at to see how Jews express things in art, but there is tremendous amount of Christian art, and Jews are in that art. So, right, is it a reflection? In some sense, it is a reflection of the culture, of the role of the Jew in the Christian society, but it also creates it as well, because sometimes people react to the art that they're saying that they see, and it creates a culture. It tells people the role that Jews are supposed to play, or it imbues people with a prejudice. And that's what we'll see, because we're going to look at some more disturbing figures and some more disturbing than others, and we can see how much that this might be the case. So this is the first image here. So this is from the 12th century, the middle of the 12th century, from England. It's called A Jew Mocks and Slaps the Cross-Bearing Christ. So you can see, and this is from a Saborian, a container here that was used in a church. So this is a sacred object here, and you can see that it starts on the left is light, and then it gets darker as you move from left to right. And Jesus is in the center, and he's holding the cross, and he's bearing the cross, right? He's bearing the cross, walking up towards the crucifixion. And then you see the Jews on Jesus on the right, on our right, which is Jesus's left side. And the Jew is always depicted on the left side of Jesus, because the term for left in Latin is sinister, right? So that's the negative side. And what we see about the Jews, you can see a few things. You can see that they're wearing this hat, and this hat is common in so much of the drawings of Jews, the depictions of Jews in medieval Christian art. It's just a Jewish hat. And this is one of the things, and Sara Lipton spends a long time discussing this, that it's not necessarily a reflection of the reality, that there were specific uniforms at times that Jews had to wear to identify them as Jewish, but this hat was not necessarily it. It's sort of just a trope that is used by artists to identify the Jew as Jewish. They always wear this type of broad-rimmed hat. It also has a beard, and you'll also see this sort of the grotesque-looking face, and also sort of like a troll looking. So there's an evilness that you can see in the figure of the Jews who are teasing Jesus, tormenting Jesus on Jesus's left side. And remember, whenever we look at the art, the left side of Jesus is always on our right. So there's always switch the orientation there. So we see here again the beard, though Jews don't always have beards, but there is the beard. The nose is big. The features are somewhat this sort of a grotesque look, and the hat. Now, this It's a different type of image, also of a crucifixion. And it's casket holding, also used in a church. And it shows Jesus on the cross. And this is from the late 12th century here. And there are three groups of people. There are the people that are nailing him to the cross, which in this case are not Jews. In many later figures, it's Jews who are nailing Jesus to the cross. We know, of course, from the Gospels, it's the Romans that did that. So we assume that those are Romans. And then there are these two groups of people. So most scholars assume that this group are Gentiles and this group are Jews, even though they are on Jesus's right. And I said, usually the Jews would be on Jesus's left. It's interesting that they are on the right, but they are clearly identified as Jews because they have those hats and they have the beards. And one of them is sort of pointing his finger as if to accuse Jesus. And what he's holding there in his other hand is a nail, which he is handing the nail to the Roman, which the Roman nails in nailing Jesus to the cross. So there is that, and the other group, which are not do not look as Jews in the same way that the group on our left does. They are not necessarily participating in the crucifixion. They're present. But you see, here is an accusatory look, and then the middle Jew is looking away. And it's also, you can see his nose there. It's a grotesquely large nose, so that the caricature of the Jew with the huge nose goes all the way back, goes back 1,000 years in European art. And it's not only that he has the nose and the beard, but he's also looking away, sort of contemptuously looking away. And the idea there is that the Jews do not understand, right, what the significance, the significance is of Jesus being nailed to the cross and being crucified. The significance, of course, is salvation, which the followers of Jesus understand, and that's where they receive salvation. The Jews do not accept Jesus because they see, but they don't understand. So the Jew looking away is indicating the Jews' rejection of the salvation that Jesus brings, the Jews' inability to understand who Jesus was and rejection of the truth of Christianity. Here, this one, the Jews are more seen as evil here. The title is Jews Attempt to Stone Christ. This is also from the late 12th century. And what we can see here is that, and this is a manuscript from the Gospel, and it shows the Jews stoning Jesus. So this is Jesus, and he has a halo around his head. There's some damage to the manuscript there, but he is leaving the city, and they have stones in their hands, and they are throwing the stones on Jesus as he leaves the city. He has a halo around his head. They do not have halos. Now, how do we know they're Jews? Again, you can see the way that the face is drawn with the long nose and the pointy beard over here, right, and the extended forehead. There's that's how Jews were drawn, and there's the sinisterness, right, of them, that they are that they physically reject Jesus in stoning Jesus out of the city, whether that's the temple, whether that's Jerusalem, probably the point there. So, and again, the reason why this is so important is that the problem, so to speak, that Judaism and the relationship between Judaism and Christianity is the claim that the Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus. So there's that hatred of Jews that here, this is 1,000 years after the events of Jesus' life, which is being displayed here, and this is an illustration in a Christian Bible, right? So the audience here are clerics, the audience here are monks, are priests, are those who are reading the Gospels and studying from them, and then are imbibing the message behind this picture that that makes that much more stronger the texts of the gospel that we looked in an earlier class, the interpretations of the church fathers that we talked about in an earlier class. Here you can see in an image the hatred that the Jews feel towards Jesus. Now, again, going back to what the idea of art is a reflection, this is a Christian drawing, right? So the perception of the Christian is that the Jews hate Christianity, right? So there's a reflection there. And also important that the audience here, the source of the prejudice and the audience for the prejudice is not the lower class, it's not the uneducated. This is the highest level of education because this picture is in a gospel manuscript and only the most educated read books in the Middle Ages. So it's important for us to always remind ourselves of that, understand that we should not dismiss anti-Semitism as something of just the lower, the uneducated, whereas the educated knew to be accepting of Jews. Here, there is that hatred as well. Now, we're going to go back to the basic explanation, the program from Augustine for the place of Jews in Christian society, where Augustine argued that the Jews had a place in the Christian world as the ones who, the witnesses to the Hebrew scriptures that is fulfilled in the New Testament and in the life of Jesus. So Augustine argued that the Jews should be preserved as the witnesses to the story, as sort of the librarians who would be able to testify to the language, the words of the Hebrew Bible, even if they failed to understand it and were blind to it. And that was why Augustine is so complicated, his legacy for Christian Europe, because there's a prejudice against the Jews that they are in the dark, but at the same time, a tolerance for them. All of these pictures show the Jews are there, they're an existing part of the society, but there's terrible resentment here and hatred that's reflected. This is an image here of one of the windows in Chartres Cathedral in France. And this is from the early 13th century. So this is the period also of the growth of the sculpture, of Gothic sculptures. And this is one example here. And the reason why this is so important is it shows, this window shows, sort of visualizes the idea of we call Christian supersessionism, the idea that the church supersedes the synagogue, that Christianity supersedes Judaism and is the fulfillment of Judaism. So it says at the bottom, Ezekiel, and it's a picture of the prophet Ezekiel. And then on top of Ezekiel is John, and it says John there. That's John the evangelist, and he is sitting on the shoulders of Ezekiel. I can make it a little bigger here so you can see that. Now, and it's a whole series, and you'll have the different evangelists on different prophets. So we're looking at this one. The Hebrew prophet has a beard, right? Because he's a Hebrew prophet, he's a Jew. But John is on top of it. John is clean shaven and standing on the shoulders. So it's the next and higher up, right? And with the halo, the face higher towards heaven. So now Ezekiel is tall, right? So there's the idea of we're standing on giants. So the respect is given to the Old Testament, to the Hebrew scriptures. And then you can see it looks like those are John's feet underneath Ezekiel's hands. So there is that respect, but there is the idea that the New Testament is built upon that foundation, but that if one only has the Old Testament, one cannot get all the way to the top of the window, right? And that the words of the prophets are only fulfilled through the New Testament, through the story of Jesus as told by the evangelists. And this is a depiction here of John, the evangelist, the author of the Gospel of John. And again, that is the way that Christianity understands itself, that it's built on the foundation of Judaism. We have to talk then about, and what the series is about, is what that means towards the real relations of real Christians towards real Jews. That we're not just talking about ideas here, that we're talking about how a segment of the population, a minority, is perceived by the majority. If the majority conceives of itself as fulfilling the purpose of the ancestors of the minority, it means the current minority is there really just to remind us of who Ezekiel was that they build upon. But Christianity is the fulfillment. Christianity is in the light, and Judaism is old and it's superseded. Right? Again, this window here, and the cathedral is going up in the 13th century at the same time that there's the explosion of the blood libel and and other types of what Gavin Langmuir told the irrational violence towards Jews. Let's go to the next. Go to the next screen. Okay, so this is a very important image here. It's from a little later, from the mid 14th century, and it actually is in the cloisters, right in Manhattan. And it's an illustration of Psalm 52, when the fool says in his heart there is no God, and the image there of the one who does not believe in God and is being chastised is clearly an image of a Jew. And it's one of the most disturbing images of a Jewish face in medieval art, because all of the caricatures are there. It's got that very huge nose, right? And the dark pointy beard. There's an evil sort of a sinisterness. It's turning away from God, drinking in a huge goblet. So there's this sense of excess, right? And the comment, and this is Sara Lipton's comment on it, which I put here for us to see. By 1340, the Jew needed no other visual cue than his distorted visage to signify his utter estrangement from God. So the text is, there is, the fool says there is no heart, but because he's swaying away, there is no God. It says because it's the Jew who says there is no God, because a Jew does not recognize God, because a Jew does not see the truth of Jesus as Jesus' salvation and Christianity right before him, and instead turns away to sensuous ways of drunkenness and appetite, and that is what's being signified in this. And whenever we see a caricature, again, it doesn't mean that all Jews were identifiable by certain characteristics. Call it a Jewish nose here, but it means that it was recognizable as a trope in art, that it was something that identified one as a Jew. We know that Jews were not identified, could not be identified physically. That's why one of the decrees in the Fourth Lateran Council from the church was that Jews should wear some kind of should be identified. And we've seen there's a lot of other laws that are passed in the various kingdoms in Europe, that there should be some kind of identification of the Jew, whether it's a certain color sash or a hat or something. The same ideas we find examples of that in the Muslim world. The fact that there are laws about that mean that a Jew was not necessarily physically identified, that the average Jew didn't look like that. But that's not the point, right? The point is that someone who was looking at this book, that reading this book, right? That the educated clergy that are reading this book and looking at this picture, right? This is a Psalter, it's a book of Psalms. They would see that face and know that that is a Jew. It is the Jew who denies God, the Jew who is a God, and that's imbued here in the picture. Now, of course, the Jews did not deny God. The fact that they were identified as Jewish mean that they were religious. You didn't have atheists. You didn't have non-believers in the Middle Ages. But to deny God is to deny the truth of God, which is the cause of so much hatred, right, from the Christian side against the Jew. And you can see that negative valence. You can see that hatred in this picture here. So this picture here, this is from from a liturgical work, and it's a picture of the crucifixion here. This is going back to the 12th century again. And I want to show you a few things. So it's Jesus on the cross. And there are many similar examples of this, and depicted because this was one of the early drawings of the church and the synagogue personified. But there's a few things. There's Jesus here, there's God on the top, there's the sun and the moon on the right. This is the personification of life, the personification of death. There are other figures the tormentors of Jesus over here. But then those figures there, this is Ecclesia, which means the church, and this is the Synagoga, which means the synagogue. And this is an early representation of the Ecclesia and the Synagoga. They're always female personifications. And one of the things that in the study that I had read by Nina Rowe, that Professor Rowe argues, is that the idea of female personifications goes back to the Roman times, that there would a Roman emperor that is a man, right? So there would be the male emperor, and then there would be two women behind the emperor. One is the personification of the city of Rome, and the other is the personification of the city of Constantinople. So this is in the late Roman period, where those were the two capitals, the two major Roman cities, Rome and Constantinople, which is Istanbul, and those that were female personifications on either side of the male emperor. So it's the same kind of thing here, where you have the female church, the female synagogue, and then Jesus in the center. Now we can look at the way that, and I'll try to, let's go back there. I'm going to try to zoom it and then move it over. I hope that works so we can see a little closer. Yes. The church has a halo, right, which shows that she's next to the sun, and she's wearing a crown. The synagogue is wearing the Jewish hat, right? And that's what we've seen in others, and I could have showed you so many other examples, but that identifies her as a Jew. She is pointing, there's that accusatory pointing finger that we found. Actually, I can quickly go back to that screen, and it's that finger over there, right? So that's that accusatory pointing finger, sort of a derogatory finger that we see there from the synagogue, accusing Jesus. And we could spend a whole hour just on any one of these pictures. The text there is that it says, "Cursed is the one who hangs from a tree." So she's accusing that of Jesus. He's saying Jesus is cursed because he's hanging from a tree. That's a quotation from the letter to the Galatians in the letters of Paul from the New Testament, and it's basically based on a verse from Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, it says you don't leave the body hanging on the tree, and in Galatians, Paul uses it as a way that Jesus takes the curses away from everyone else by hanging on the tree. But it's used in a lot of Christian iconography, put in the words of Jews who are condemning Jesus. Now, from the Christian perspective, it's a wrongful condemnation, but it's because the synagogue doesn't understand what's really happening. So she condemns him, "Cursed are you who are hanging on the tree." And in fact, there's a whole area of Jewish sort of anti-Christian literature from the Middle Ages, where the Jews do basically defer to Jesus as the hanged one, because hanging on a tree, and the tree is, of course, the cross. There is a negative description of Jesus. So they put that into her mouth. But the idea is clearly she doesn't understand, because she's in the dark, right? She's on the dark side. She's on Jesus's left side, the sinister side. She's under the moon, whereas the church is under the sun. But she's a little, there's got a glare, right? Where she's glaring at Jesus. And it's a very, very interesting glare. And if you look at the church, right, the church is looking at with adoration, with sort of a connectedness. And she has that glare. There's a little something tempting about it. There's a teasingness about it. And this is the figure of death personified underneath. And death there has a protruding nose, which kind of reminds us of the Jewish nose. And you can look at life. This is a very, very different type of face of the personification of life. So there are other tropes that will develop later in the image of the defeated synagogue vis-a-vis the church. Here it doesn't show that. It just shows that the synagogue is a part of the Christian story, right? That there's two parts of that story. There's the right side of Jesus, which is the church that understands what is happening. And then there's the left side, which is the synagogue that fails to understand what is happening. And what's the takeaway here to understand is that the way that medieval Christianity portrayed itself in Europe, which is in a society where the Jews were there as a minority, it said that other group, the other that doesn't understand, is a necessary part of the Christian story, the way the story is told. We'll see a few other examples of that as we move on. This is an ivory plaque that was probably used. Okay, some folks, please, you have to mute yourselves. Otherwise, I'll have to. Okay, thank you. No, all right. I'll have to close this to take care of the mute. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. Now I have to find the controls. It's okay. No. All right. Well, it looks like we figured it out. So I'll go back to the share screen. Okay. And from current slide. Okay. Here we go. So this is housed at the cloisters right here in New York, but it's actually jointly owned by the Metropolitan Museum and the Louvre in Paris. So I said this was an ivory plaque that was probably used as a cover for a book, probably a Bible. And there are several of these. And this was just one that I thought was the clearest that we could see what is going on there. And it's a similar as the last screen, right? As the drawing, is that it's a crucifixion scene with angels, probably again, the sun and moon on the top. But, and this is Mary, and I think this is John the Baptist on either side. But these two, and these are the figures that are the tormentors of Jesus on the right and left here. But these two women on his immediate right and left are the personification of the church and the synagogue. And the church, Ecclesia, is identified here because she is holding a chalice, which is a cup. And what the cup is doing is she's collecting the blood that is pouring out of Jesus' side that has just been pierced with this spear. So the blood is pouring out, and that is the blood of the Eucharist. And the Eucharist is held in a chalice. And again, remember this period here, right? This is from, well, this is earlier. This is the 9th century. This is a very early thing here, very early drawing. Let me expand it again. But that is what the church does, right? The role of the church is the sacrament, right? Is the mass that the church is receiving the blood of salvation. The synagoga is here, and she is identified because she's holding a staff with a flag. And what that is it's the sign of authority. But she's the old authority because she's being passed by. And her gaze there is very interesting. She's looking, right? She's looking at what's happening, looking at Jesus, looking at her counterpart, Ecclesia, who's receiving the blood from Jesus' side. And we don't know. She's looking back, and there's the sense of looking back and not being a part, though, of that action, that she's the old authority, but she's being passed on, or refusing to move forward because she doesn't understand what is going on. So again, you see and again, of course, she's on the left side of Jesus. The synagogue is always on the left, and the church is always on the right. There's nothing evil about her. There's nothing defeated. It's just the sense that she's she's not a part of that action anymore. And that look is such an interesting look, and we could put so much into what Synagoga is thinking as she's looking and watching Ecclesia receive the blood from Jesus' side. So again, that is a 9th century representation there of the Ecclesia and Synagoga, the church and synagogue on either side of Jesus. This is a stained glass window from the 12th century from the Abbey Church of Saint Denis this is in the north of Paris. And it shows Jesus here with the church and the synagogue. How do we know it's the church and the synagogue there? Because there's two women on either side of Jesus. And if you read the right, sorry. Okay, please mute unless it's a question.
Ira Spar's screen.
Ira? Okay. Okay, let me try to fix that again. Mute all. Okay, I just muted all. Thanks. I'll go back to the share screen. Okay. If you look at the writings, it says Ecclesia there in the stained glass window, and it says Synagoga, right? Synagogue on the right side of the window. So, and again, our right is Jesus' left. So again, Synagoga is on the left, the sinister side, and Ecclesia is on the right, on the strong side. So, but there's nothing negative about the presentation of Synagoga here vis-a-vis Ecclesia, right? That they both look like matrons, right? So where they're matronly women, and they both have a role in a sort of form the transept of the cross that Jesus forms. And the idea there is that both have a role. This is not a negative. This is sort of you could say this is the positive side of the Augustinian legacy, that the Jews and Judaism do have a role in the Christian world, and that the church is the new and the synagogue is the old, but they are still present. And that even though Synagoga doesn't accept who Jesus, the role of the crucifixion, her presence is important because she brings forward the testimony of the scriptures, which we saw in that other stained glass with John standing literally on the shoulders of Ezekiel. Okay, now, here we go. Now let's go to the Gothic sculpture from the cathedrals. And there are many, many, many examples. The three that I'm going to look at here are the three that are described in great length in this in the dissertation that I read here by Nina Rowe. She focuses on Reims, Strasbourg, and Bamberg and Strasbourg. So Reims is in France here, and what she does that's so wonderful in the book that I read is she doesn't just analyze the sculptures of the church and the synagogue, but she also explains it in the context of the greater artwork, which is the cathedral as a whole. Where are they placed on the cathedral? And what role did they play for the audience? And here, the audience, unlike art used on reliquaries, on the containers of relics that were in churches, or the covers of gospels or psalters that were items, and there were many other examples I could have shown that would have only been viewed by the monks or the priests. This type of sculpture was viewed by everyone. So this is the facade there, at least on the side where the ecclesia and the church are, by the entrance to the cathedral in Reims. And you can see here there's the rose window, and then under that, columns on either side of the rose window, that's where the ecclesia and the synagoga are. And the synagoga is always going to be on our right, because there the rose window represents the salvation of Jesus then, or God, and on our left, which is its right, is the church. And here, and again, a lot of the images here that I just took from the book, Ecclesia is standing, and She's standing upright. She's wearing a crown, right? She's holding a spear or a staff and holds a chalice. And the chalice is always the sign of the church. We saw that in the older representations also. And then on the side, that's a king sort of on the side. There are other kings that are put out there. And what she explains, Roe in her presentation was that Reims was built itself as a cathedral for the coronation of French kings. So there's this whole row of random kings that, and then, but at the front of the row is the female personifications of the church, the synagogue. And if we look at the synagogue, I can make it a little bigger here. Now the staff is missing, but she would have been holding a staff like Ecclesia, but the synagogues, we know from other examples, synagoga's staff is always broken, whereas Ecclesia's is strong. Synagoga is holding, those are the 10 commandments there. And the 10 commandments are upside down. And they're upside down, meaning that synagogue, right, Judaism, the Jews, they are the ones who possess the law, right? So, and that's the Old Testament, but they don't understand it. It's upside down. Like, try to read a book upside down. You can't make sense of a book if it's upside down. So she's holding it upside down. She's about to drop it, right? That's how she just doesn't understand what she's holding. Her crown is falling off her head and she's blindfolded. We didn't see the blindfolded Ecclesia Synagoga in the older pictures. That's something that develops here with the sculpture, the Gothic sculpture here. Her pose is also a little bit less steady than Ecclesia's pose. And so that's from Reims. And then I want to show you from Bamberg, and this is in Germany here in the Rhineland. This is an entrance to the church there with the statuary on the side. And again, synagogue and ecclesia are at the top, they're at the front. And that's ecclesia, and that is synagoga on our right and our left. And it's the entrance to the church, which is in the middle. And here you can see the depictions. It's going to be a similar, approach where ecclesia is a matron. She's holding her tunic. She's wearing a crown. And again, it broke off, but she would have most likely been holding a staff, a spear in one hand and the chalice in the other. And you can see that synagoga, she's unsteady, right? She's blindfolded. Her staff is broken. And there's usually a 10 commandments or a law, holding her book being held upside down in her right hand, in her left hand there as well. She's not unattractive because they're both matrons. They're both important elements, the two pillars of the Christian society, but she is the one who was surpassed and who was blind, whereas Ecclesia is the one who was strong, who sees, who recognizes what's going on. Let me back up to this. One of the explanations in Reims, and it's really, there you can really see the sense of the upside down 10 commandments there is really wonderfully portrayed. The very time that this, these sculptures are all going up in the 13th century, the first half of the 1200s. And not only is it the same time period of everything that we talked about in the last class, but remember, one of the anti-Jewish acts of the century is the burning of the Talmud, where there was the condemnation of the Talmud. The Pope had called for, Gregory IX had called for the Talmud to be investigated, and Louis IX of France was the only monarch who followed through on the Pope's order. And there were about 30,000 volumes of the Talmud that were collected, brought to Paris, and were burned in Paris. And the reason why the church and then Louis IX were so outraged by the Talmud was that it symbolized that the Jews were not following their script, right? The role of the Jews was to be the quiet, subservient minority and to bear witness to the past, which Christianity is built upon, which is the role that Augustine laid out for the Jews. And when Jewish converts to Christianity, and the important one is Nicholas Donin, who reported this to the Pope, was that no, the Jews are actually have their own interpretation of the Hebrew of the Old Testament. And they're not just preserving it literally, but they're taking it in a whole different direction, which is not their job. So that's why the role of the Jews is to sort of freeze the text. The only acceptable interpretation of the text, we would call a midrash, is that of the church fathers and the teachings of the church, not the Talmud and the teachings of the rabbis. So the Talmud is burned, and at the same time, you have this sculpture that's standing above the entrance to the church, the chose synagoga, who holds the law upside down. So the point is that, and blind. So the Talmud has been burned. The synagogue, the church, the rabbis, they don't know how to read their own law. So the argument that Professor Rowe makes is that this sculpture basically is meant to put the Jews back in their place in the same way that the burning of the Talmud is meant to put the Jews back in their place. And that's where we're seeing a transition in the art of the 13th century, that it's not just that synagoga has a role next to ecclesia, but it's a derogatory role. It's a role that it's a role that she has surpassed, that she is blind, which we saw also in Bamberg. Now, the other thing that the art historians have caught is that there's evidence that when these sculptures were produced in the 13th century, they were colored. There was a polychrome element to them, right? Where not all the sculptures were, but Ecclesia and Synagoga always are, because of the prominent role that they have. So as you were entering the church, you would see, your eyes would be drawn. Today you have to say, where is it? And guidebooks will never point this out because it's an embarrassing anti-Jewish element of Christian iconography. But in medieval times, it would have been very easy to spot because of the color in it. Now, again, the way that Professor Rowe explains this, again, is it's not just the individual sculptures, but the context they play for the audience. So this is the entrance to the church, where there's always more than one entrance, but this is where there would be a ritual progression into the church. What happens then when you walk through the door? You pass Ecclesia and Synagoga on the sides, you walk through the door. So the Bamberg Cathedral is most known for this, is called the Bamberg Rider. Once you enter, and the door here is on the left, you then pass this knight on a horse. And we don't know who it is, right? Some say it's a king, it's the emperor. It's unknown who it is, but what Professor Rowe argues is it's the male sense of authority that first you entered in with Ecclesia and Synagoga, the two matrons on the right and the left, and then just as the male leaders, which would be the archbishop or the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, is entering and all the penitents and the people following him is personified there by the rider on the horse. And then you would enter the church. And this is the most fascinating thing that that when we visit these cathedrals, we never notice. You look up at the sky, and you look up, and we all do that when we enter a huge Gothic cathedral, right? Our eyes are drawn up to the ceiling, to the vaulted ceiling. And there is something on that vault, and it would have been painted, right? It would have known to look up. And what is that? What is that? On the top of the vault, it is these images that one would say are caricatures of evil Jews, right? It's got those hats, and it's got the protruding nose, the tongue is out. This is sort of a grotesque beard, and that is at the top of the cathedral. So there's the sense that the Jewish presence is there, but this is much more grotesque than the synagoga, the matronly personification there of the synagogue. But it shows the evil that Jews represent in society and how they are cleansed symbolically by the rider on the horse, and also by the rituals that are taking place in the church itself, the confessionals, the Eucharist, all of these rituals that are just newly mandated for for most Christians, right? From the Fourth Lateran Council that are being performed under these images here. Let's go to the next, sorry, let me fix that. Let's go to the next screen. And this is something else that was fascinating. Again, these are Nina Rowe's own photos. Again, she's the art historian from Fordham that was the author of the study that I worked through here. Probably got me through COVID, because there's nothing like getting the mind to focus on things. But here, look at these photos that she took. So this is Ecclesia and Synagoga. Now, this is not on the outside, because that, if I back up here, right, this is the entrance. Those, very often, these are no longer the original sculptures in Europe. The originals have been taken off, they're put in a museum, and those are copies that are on the outside. So this is where Ecclesia was, and this is where Synagoga was. But the originals are in the museum there. But she says the way it looked, back up again, is you would have walked up the steps. So she was thinking, what do they look like from the perception of the procession going into the church? They're looking to the left up at Ecclesia and looking to the right up at Synagoga. And as they go up the steps, as you go higher up, and this is the perception that Ecclesia, is standing straight up. Synagoga is looking bent, and you can see the bend of the staff. As you walk up, then you look up at the left, and Ecclesia, this church, is like a column herself. Whereas the more you walk up the steps, the sculpture gives the impression that Synagoga is actually tumbling down, right? It almost looks like she's in motion. It's like as you walk up the steps, it's a cartoon freeze and you see her falling down. And again, it's her theory. There's no way to prove that it was intended to do that, but it's a brilliant insight in how does something etched in stone give us an image of motion. And the motion is the movement of sacred history from the Christian perspective, right? Of the triumph of the church and the downfall of the synagogue. And that by progressing into the cathedral, you're witness the downfall of the synagogue as you walk in. And again, always in our mind is, what does this mean for the real relations of then Christians who then relating to Jews after these processions in the church? One more city is Strasbourg. Strasbourg is in France. It's the capital of Alsace, which is on the border between France and Germany. For much of history, it was in Germany as well. And I visited Strasbourg with Ala this October, and I had wanted to see the Synagoga and Ecclesia statues because it's one of the most impressive there. I didn't see it on the main entrance because it's actually on the side entrance there. I kind of looked up in the guidebook and looked up on Google where it was, and they told me that it's in the museum, which is next door to the cathedral. And I only discovered now by doing more research that there were copies, replicas on the door. And I looked up in my photos, and actually in one picture that I took, I could see in the background Ecclesia, Synagoga in the background. Wish I could be there again to take a better picture. But the originals, which this photo is from the museum, they wouldn't let me in the museum because my CDC vaccine card was not good enough. I needed the French app, and there was just no way that I could talk myself in without having that app or that European app. That they had completely uninterested in the CDC card and wouldn't let me into the museum. So c'est la vie, as we say. But where was Synagoga and Ecclesia? Ecclesia is here on our left. Synagoga is there on our right. And in the middle is a statue of sort of King Solomon sitting on a throne, holding a sword on his lap. And he's the wise king who judges. Professor Rowe argues that there were cases were actually held right here in the courtyard in front of the cathedral. And then there is it's a Jesus, I think, figure who's crowning King Solomon, standing above King Solomon there. And again, that's the New Testament standing on above the Old Testament figure. And this is the personification there of the synagogue and the church that we see. Synagogue, Ecclesia standing there. Her spear is here a staff that has a crucifix on it, and the chalice she's always holding the chalice, and she's very regal. She has a crown there. Synagoga, we can see she is bent over, she is blindfolded, her staff is broken, and she's holding the tablets upside down, about to drop them. So we can see that. But what's also particularly moving is that Ecclesia is looking over at Synagoga. She's looking over to her, and a lot of scholars point out that it's that moment of potential reconciliation where the church is hoping that her sister Synagoga will finally see what's happening and she will come forward. And yet, when you look at Synagoga, you see there's no chance of that happening because she's turned away, right? Her face is turned away from the salvation, which is Jesus standing over King Solomon in the middle. And she's about to drop the tablets, and her spear is already broken. Oops, what happened there? Let me fix that. And I think that is the final screen. So that's what I had today. We're just about out of time. I know this was a look at, I selected different images for us to look at there. And the question is, did these images inspire, right, hatred or prejudice? Or on the other hand, did they inspire the sense that there is a place where Jews and synagogue belongs in Christian society? And that is a debate among the historians and the interpreters here. The last part of the story is that as we move through the 13th century, the Jews disappear, right? Where at the beginning, when the art is constructed, they are a present force, but then they're gone. They're gone because of the violent attacks, and they're also gone eventually because of the expulsions. So then we move to a time where there are no more Jews, and there is only these iconographic personification of synagoga, right, of what Judaism stands for, and the grotesque images that we looked at before. And then Judaism is just preserved as an idea of what was moved, what we moved past. But we have to read the art in both ways. We have to read it from what it would have meant to a Christian population that was living without Jews, but we also have to go a little further, the time when there were Jews living there. And in all of these communities, the Jews lived, they flourished. And not only that, but the Jewish street, right, where the synagogue, where the actual synagogue was always a block away or a half a block away from the cathedral. Is one picture. Let me see if I can get it here. I'll show you let's see if I could find that quickly, where it shows where the synagogue was. So this is in Bamberg, in Bavaria. And if I put that here, you can see this was where the synagogue was, and the spires of the cathedral are right there. So it's literally a block away. So there's this sculpture of the personification of a defeated of the synagogue, right, that you see as you enter the cathedral. And then you walk a block down and there's an actual synagogue, right? And that's the tension there. And it was the tension that eventually boiled over in the explosion of anti-Jewish violence and ultimately the expulsion of the Jews, right? The sense that Jews were dangerous. If you look up at the vaulted ceiling of the cathedral and you see those grotesque images of Jews, and I could have showed you others with the Jews holding a money bag, and you see that in some of the stained glass windows there as well, we could understand how we got to a point where the Jews would be seen as too dangerous. They said, thank you, St. Augustine. We understand there was a place for Jews, but other kingdoms can keep the Jews as witnesses. We want them out of where we live. And then they're they're expelled. I want to stop in a moment if there's any questions, but just to go, so we're the next stage we're going to talk about is about expulsions, and the next class we're going to focus specifically on the Spanish expulsion, which is the most important and most famous expulsion, also because so many of the European expulsions were then backtracked. Jews were expelled, allowed back in, expelled, allowed back in. The Spanish expulsion is the largest, most prosperous Jewish community. And then, there's only been sort of a reparation now in our own time with Spain extending citizenship to Jews who can claim Spanish ancestry. So we're going to talk about that next time. So sort of like changing gears then. But this was our sort of look at the iconography. Any questions or comments before we close? And I go back to sleep. All right, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we're off next Monday, but I think the Monday after that, we're back. So just keep the schedule. Wonderful to see everybody again.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Feel better.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.